You're tuned in to HorrorSlop, where the stories are rotting, truth is twisted, and sleep, forget about it.
Yeah, welcome to the pit. It's gross, it's creepy, and honestly, it's kind of my vibe. Hope you like nightmares, because tonight's tale, it slithers.
Straight from the darkest corners of Reddit. Real stories, real fear, and just enough blood to stain your soul.
So at least grab your bed sheets, so grab a flashlight, and maybe a therapist.
This is HorrorSlop.
Alright, kicking things off with a personal favorite. It's messy, it's weird, and it sets the tone real fast. Story 1. Don't blink.
The party was 2 weeks ago. I stole a few beers when the adults weren't looking and shared them with Lucy Sitkins away from the crowd. She drank hers greedily as we sat beneath the bough of a low tree, speaking low so no passers-by could hear. Every time we whispered, we tilted our faces a little closer and closer. There was a moment where I thought she was going to rest her head on my shoulder as she told me about how she wanted to be a vet, and my heart skipped as I debated putting my arm around her waist. Larry Sitkins had swallowed a beer can. We got halfway through the day before Mr. Straub shut the bleachers on his neck. It was in front of the cheerleaders. There were ambulances again. Crying girls and boys and even some of the teachers. Most of them just looked confused, except for Mr. Straub. I managed to catch a glimpse of him as I jogged over to find out what all the screaming was about. He looked empty of all thoughts and emotions, with his head set at a crooked angle. I figured that was how people must look when dead, but apparently, he'd been like that during the act. He'd walked up, perched his neck between the slatted benches, and hit the remote button to slide the bleachers closed. Whole time, he was just slack-jawed and stupid-looking, even as the metal mechanism crunched vertebrae and cartilage. I later learned Larry had been like this too, when he killed himself. He was getting ready to pop the tab on a fresh beer when he simply stopped, looked up to the sky, then forced the whole thing down his throat in a single world-shattering moment. I didn't know it back then, but there were others just like Larry and Mr. Straub. A barista in a coffee shop steamed half the skin off her arm while keeping eye contact with a guy in the drive-thru. A doctor at the local clinic used a biopsy needle to inject air straight into his own heart. Lots of people shot themselves, but not one of them aimed for the head. That's a weird touch, if you think about it. These people obliterated their torsos or limbs with high-powered rifles at point-blank range. No reason offered. Just a vacant expression as they deleted bits of their bodies and left nothing but ragged stumps. There was no school the next day, which was the only real clue I got about how panicked the local authorities were. Wouldn't be long before the national authorities joined in on the panic too, but that would come later. That morning, my parents left the house at 9:30 for a meeting at the town hall, and they dropped me off at my grandma's on the way. I waited for them to leave before I told my grandma I was heading out. It was a hot day and she only nodded her approval as she sat reading with my sister. She hated seeing me play video games and always encouraged me to go make my own adventures outside. It took time to recognize that seeing a dead body had freaked me out. I felt like it shouldn't have messed with me as much as it did, and I guess that's why there was a little bit of anger mixed in with all those thoughts in my head. It's also why I pushed on through the woods until the trees began to thin, marching in the humid summer heat until my t-shirt was soaked and my legs ached. I wanted to feel tired. Wanted it so the only thing I could think of were my throbbing hamstrings and sunburnt forehead. It honked as it came past. Another day and I might have worried that I was gonna get in trouble for playing on the rails, but all I could really think of was the thing I'd seen lying by the tracks. It had been lit up by the train as it came roaring out of the tunnel, not far from the entrance. In the strange silence after the train had gone, there was only the dim light of the setting sun to see inside the tunnel, and everything looked the same. Old clothes. Broken bottles. Discarded crates. Trash strewn around wherever it found space. But I knew what I'd seen in the harsh white light of the train's passing beams, and it was a hell of a lot more than garbage. I'd seen a man. But nightmares end. The noise persisted. It was the shuffle of something getting dragged over gravel and old plastic bags. It had a rhythm to it that was slow. The word that springs to mind is one I got taught in a biology class a long time ago. But still, when I saw him crawl out of the dark and into the light, I screamed so loud I'd have a sore throat for the next few days. It was the man from the tracks, and even though he moved, he was not alive. I tried telling myself that he couldn't have been dead because only living things move, but that was horseshit. He dragged his bloody legless torso with one working arm while the other lay dislocated across his back, the fingers of both hands curling as he heaved himself along. And that face. That same empty gawking expression, just like Mr. Straub's. He wasn't alive. He was a dead thing, and that made him some kind of impossible monster. I turned and ran screaming through the trees. Whole time, I could only think of the thing that was behind me and was trying to close the distance. It didn't matter that it was slow. Didn't matter that I ran for over an hour. Didn't even matter that I wasn't sure if I knew my way home or was even running in the right direction. All that mattered was putting one foot in front of the other until there was nothing left inside me. Time turned funny. Seconds moved in strange staccatos until eventually I collapsed on legs made of rubber. Then I dragged myself into an old tree hollow to hide, and that was where I lost all consciousness. I vomited some, then found my way back to the beaten path and stumbled achingly through the cold night air back to my grandma's farmhouse. Dad had a gun. That was what my grandma was trying to wrestle out of his hands. She held a knife, and that's why there was blood, but I didn't know whose it was. I wasn't sure what she was planning to do with it until she tried to use it to cut his trigger finger off. The scuffle resulted in another bang and a window exploded outwards. I finally ducked and grabbed my sister, rushing her into another room, but there were 3 more explosions and each one broke something inside me. By the time I heard my name being called, I was half deaf and twitching at things that weren't there. My sister pleaded for me to come back, her pink fingers grasping for me as I put her down. But my mother was shouting for me to come help, and I wanted to keep my family safe. She told me to get something to tie Dad up while she and my grandma used both arms to pin each of his wrists to the ground. His hand bled weakly as my grandma used every inch of her strength to simultaneously pin him and stop the flow. He thrashed slowly beneath them, his movements languid and easy, but I could tell it was a struggle for them to keep him down. As I ran to the garage, I saw the gun on the ground with Dad's severed finger nearby. I kicked it out of reach before returning shortly with the rope my grandma used to tie the garage door open during hot summers. Mom tied the knots. My grandma tried talking to my dad, and it was one of the few times in my life I saw her as the woman who'd once changed his diapers. She was so soothing and tender, and her constant muttering that everything would be okay seemed so fragile. She was scared for him. Mom just did everything in her power to wrestle some safety out of the moment. Only once his arms were securely behind his back and she was confident he wasn't breaking free did she stand back, put her hands behind her, and then immediately hunch forward and sob. There was a biohazard symbol on their clothes. It felt like she was painting normality onto tissue paper, desperately afraid of breaking it. I tried my best to seem like I was okay. Last thing I wanted was to feel like some kid who needed his mommy. We mostly just talked about mundane things, but it was hard for both of us. The only time the atmosphere seemed to change was when she asked me something strange halfway through dinner. The men who took him asked a whole bunch of questions about it. Then, with a fragile smile, "Have you done your homework? They told me your teacher would send you some assignments online." Just like that, the thin pretense of normality came back. Booty was left with a wriggling feeling in my stomach. It didn't go away as the evening marched on. In fact, it only grew worse until I found myself in bed rolling from side to side and thinking about Mom's question. The men who'd bundled Dad off hadn't seemed like the kind who messed around. They must have had some idea what was going on, so why ask about meat? On the very last trip, Dad shot 3 deer but we only brought back 2. 1 for us. 1 for the town barbecue. The 3rd he shot but we left it on the forest floor because by the time it had died I was pale and shaking and even Dad couldn't keep the tremor out of his voice. Neither of us had expected the deer to stand up on its hind legs and walk towards us like a man, its gait a heavy and broken thing as it lumbered over the forest floor. He'd still ask if I wanted to head out with him each weekend, but he never seemed surprised when I made some excuse. The only time we talked about it was not long before the barbecue when he drove me to school one day. He didn't deal with it head on. He skirted the topic. Sometimes deer get sick, he told me. A little like old folks do. Remember Grandpa? He got real scary towards the end, didn't he? Well, deer get sick too. But we don't have to worry. Same way you couldn't catch what Grandpa had, well we can't catch what the deer have. Us humans are safe. Just an uncomfortable part of nature. What if he'd been trying to convince himself it was okay? 2 deer. I tried remembering what they'd been like. I hadn't checked them after we got in the truck. Why would I? Seemed as normal as any others as we tied them down, but I hadn't really been paying attention either. I'd been hunting since I was 7. Helping Dad was automatic to me. And to top it off, I hadn't known what I was meant to be looking for. I couldn't have forced these thoughts out of my head with a crowbar. At some point I accepted I wasn't getting any sleep that night and I settled down to torture myself some more until I realized it didn't have to be that way. Dad had an old freezer in the shed and he sometimes kept meat in there. Not for long, and usually not for eating. He'd use it for things he wanted to skin or try and make a trophy out of TT, which he rarely did since Mom didn't like that kind of thing in the house. But if the deer weren't in the freezer in the kitchen or the garage, then they might be in the shed. And if I did open up that chest and saw 2 deer bodies in there, that meant whatever was going around and making people hurt themselves couldn't have come from our little hunting trip. I snuck out my room as quietly as I could. Mom was on the phone with my grandma and she was crying. I stopped briefly by her door and listened to see if maybe they knew something I didn't, but after she started talking about how scared she was I just felt bad and moved on. At least it meant she was too busy to notice me creeping down the stairs. Inside was nearly pitch black. My phone helped me light it up a little, but I didn't touch the nearby switch in case Mom saw it from her window. Cobwebs hung low from the ceiling, and shadows crawled across the floor and walls as I moved closer to the freezer. The entire time I kept expecting something to happen. I even imagined that deer rising from beneath the lid, pushing it open to stand unnaturally tall on its hind legs where it looked down at me with the same dead eyes I'd seen in my father. The thought scared me so bad I nearly hyperventilated myself straight into a panic attack, but before I had time to really worry about any of that I found my hand on the freezer latch. Had Dad really served everyone sick meat? Was that really why Larry Sitkins, Mr. Straub, and all those other people had killed themselves? I had 1 foot outside when the freezer door rattled against the latch. When the latch finally gave way, the lid flew open and stayed there. Light poured out of the box and I waited, breath held, for that thing to emerge. To come roaring out of sight and bear down towards me on unnatural legs. But nothing happened. The silence stretched on for what seemed like an eternity until, at last, there was a crash louder than any before and the entire freezer rocked back and forth and slowly fell over. The thing inside moved with the sound of snow crunching beneath your feet. Its thick neck and broken head twisting side to side, scanning the shed's interior with faulty eyes. I've never seen anything move like that. Not before or since. This was worse than the man in the tunnel. Worse by 1,000 times. The deer was still mostly frozen but some impossible force was making fight the crystallized water in its own cells and the result was skin that ripped like tissue and muscles that cracked and crunched as they tried to flex and contract. It lifted its head and tried to scream. The breathy sound that left its fuzzy black lips made my heart start skipping beats while my bladder emptied. I couldn't help it. Couldn't stop myself. And when I looked down and saw pieces of melting flesh start to writhe and wriggle, I tried with all my might to stifle the cry building up in my throat, but it still escaped as a desperate, high-pitched whine. But it had spent months in that box, hadn't it? This was the disease when you skipped 3 months ahead. Anger. Hatred. Jesus Christ, I couldn't even say if it was gonna eat me. That's what you think when you see a zombie, right? It's gonna try and take a big bite out of you. But this frozen clump of hair and meat and braying lips dragged itself across the floor with an expression like murderous rage. The look of someone ready to beat another living thing to death using its own hands if it had to. I made it 3 steps before I slammed into my dad. He swallowed, then briefly examined his hands. "I think I'm dead," he muttered, almost as if he was talking to himself. "When did I die?" I pulled myself up and grabbed his hand. He was cold, but his pulse was racing. I could even see the veins in his forearms throb sickeningly. "Dad? Are you okay?" "They told me I'm sick," he said, his eyes gazing vacantly at the empty space behind me. "I think they're right. But there's more." He looked at me, the intensity of his gaze so powerful that I let go of his hand and took a step back. For the first time in my life, I was scared of him. "I'm not alone in here," he said, his voice pleading for help. Slowly, his expression twisted into a grotesque mask of agony and desperation. "Oh Jesus! It isn't just me in here." The shed door burst open. I managed to twist around just enough I could see what came out, and I felt an urgent terror crawling up my flesh. The deer had pulled itself loose from the freezer, and it now stood in the doorway on 2 legs. Its body looked all wrong in that posture, like when you twist the limbs around on a doll. Probably not far from the truth, thinking about it. Dad didn't react, but I began to scream as the nightmare coalesced around me. My father gripping, holding me in place as that horrible thing lurched towards me on 2 legs. It moved like claymation or a puppet show gone wrong, but it was quicker than I'd feared. As each step brought it closer, I found myself losing what little control I had. I started to scream. Started to shriek. I beat at my father with my fists, but he didn't budge an inch. My clenched hands just bounced off his strong shoulders, and it was like I was trying to hurt a punching bag. I started to swear too. Started to scream things I thought were bad, then worse, then so bad I'm not even sure I can blame other people for putting those words in my head. I told my dad I hated him. Called him a son of a bitch. Called him even worse. All that commotion got the attention of others. Neighbors' lights started coming on. My mom emerged from the back door, wrapping her robe around herself as she squinted at us in the dark. I don't know why, but I thought that other people appearing would help somehow. That as 2, 3, half a dozen people came stumbling into the open lawns, peering over waist-high fences, it had stopped the slow but inevitable onslaught of that monster. It did no such thing. I had to listen to their confused shouts and cries while gesturing and begging for help, the entire time the sound of the creature over my shoulder getting closer and closer. Meanwhile, my hands tried to pry away my father's thick arms, but each time I got leverage he simply flexed and his grip tightened around me. He was muttering something the whole time, but I couldn't hear it. Finally, my mom screamed and ran swinging an old rake at the space behind me. I heard the impact. The splintering of the wooden handle. Then she stumbled backwards and I had to twist to get a look at the deer that was now just 6 or 7 feet away, the spokes of a rake still sticking out of its face. The monster looked right at me and opened its mouth, and I swear to fucking God it was gonna talk, but right then someone shouted. "For the love of God, Alice, get away from that thing." Alice was my mother's name, and she fell to the floor just seconds before an explosion broke the night, silencing all voices and shattering the deer's head like a crystal ball hitting the ground. My heart raced so fast I thought for a moment I was gonna die. Then I looked down at Dad and finally heard what he'd been mumbling this whole time. It's in us and it wants us. It's in us and it wants us. It's in us and it wants us. They're treating us in this special hospital. Mom was real upset that visitations are limited, but I think it might be for the best. Her and my sister tested clean. Most people did. Mom snuck me this phone a couple weeks ago and I've been using that to write. Funny thing is one of the orderlies saw me on it a few days ago and just laughed. I think that maybe the government aren't too worried about this story getting out. At first I didn't really get why until I started actually putting all this down into writing. Got to the part where that half-man came out the tunnel and I realized no one's gonna believe me. Still, I gotta try. Partly 'cause I wanna protect people. Whatever this disease is, it's a hell of a lot more than some twisted prion, and I think the government knows that. Dad certainly did. Most infected did too. That's why they killed themselves. They want it out. The voice that comes with this illness is it's like if your brain is just words in a book and then someone dipped that book in a can full of used motor oil. You just want to give in. Hand it all over. It wants your body, so whatever you do, don't fight. That's worse. Give it up. In hindsight, we should have let Dad kill himself. What he went through was, well, it was probably a lot worse than the others who got to die. I sometimes think about going into his room with a pillow, but security is pretty tight around him. It wants me to. This sickness, it lives out in the woods. Way out, in parts of the soil where the sun hasn't shone in millions of years. It's old enough to remember a time you could walk from Appalachia to what's now called Glasgow. And it's been fumbling around out there, in the brains of deer and other things. The sickness tells me this. Tells me it's learning about this new world. Tells me how my mind tastes. It tells me it's getting closer.
Something's still listening, and it wants more. Next story. Just don't say its name.
She Sold Happiness in Glass Jars, by Flard. The poster read, Happiness. Sold in glass jars. Call today, and underneath the text was a phone number. On my walk back, I was thinking of what my life had become. I did this often. I always dreamed of traveling when I was younger. I wanted to drive across the country or solo backpack across Europe. Then I met Kelsey. Don't get me wrong, I loved Kelsey. I mean, I still do. We just don't have that spark anymore. When you meet someone and get in a relationship, whether it's meant to be or not, some of your personal life plans have to be put on hold. And then that relationship turns to marriage, and then you have a baby, then you have to enroll your daughter in a preschool, then you have to get a better paying job and work more hours and blah, blah, blah. I'm not trying to throw a pity party for myself. I'm just saying I wasn't exactly content with where I was in my life. I wouldn't have referred to myself as a happy person. As I took the same route home that I did every day to work and back, I walked by the same poster I had passed the day before. I don't know why, I really don't, but I decided to call the number. I figured it would be some joke. Maybe someone just picks up and says, I love you, on the other end and hangs up. Or maybe it's a line to a sex worker. I had no idea what to expect. Hi, I'm calling about your poster. Your ad. Oh, awesome, she said calmly, when do you want to pick it up? Pick what up? The jar, she said, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. Oh, of course, I realized then that I had left work early without telling Kelsey, so I could just go pick it up now and she'd be none the wiser. What exactly is it that you're selling? Okay. Should we meet somewhere? Now, I didn't think I was really going to be buying a jar of happiness or whatever. I was 99% sure she was going to sell me drugs. Maybe heroin would be in the jar. I remember thinking, oh no, happiness is probably a nickname for some street drug and I'm going to a drug deal. What if she's a cop? Am I going to be arrested? But something inside me told me to keep walking, and so I did. I stood outside and texted her. Me, I'm here. Me, what are you driving? You were the one that called about the jar, right? Cool, well, here you go. Pretty rad, isn't it? What is it? You've asked that, like, 3 different times, I think. My answer is still the same. It is happiness. Happiness in a glass jar. What do I do with it? She started to get into her car. Wait. I said, I thought you were selling this. How much is it? Don't worry, man, she said with a smile, you'll pay. She closed her door and I stepped out of her way as she backed up, then drove off. What the hell had just happened? What was I holding? I looked down at the jar again, its radiance was simply mesmerizing. I put it in my pocket and could see its glow slightly through my pants. I began to walk home. What was just a nice, sunny day, quickly changed into a rainy one with clouds wrapping the sky. It was not forecasted that it would rain, or else I would have ridden the bus or subway to work that day. I jogged home trying not to get too drenched. I finally found shelter once I made it to my apartment building. I knocked on the door and said in a somewhat loud voice, "Hey babe, it's me, I don't know what happened to my key." I heard the door being unlocked from the other side. Apartment number 33. I know that was my apartment. I know it was. I'd been in apartment 33 for 5 years now. But that was not my apartment. From what I could see inside, all the furniture was different, it was painted a different color, it was all wrong. I felt like I'd hit my head and was drugged. In that moment, nothing made sense. Since it was still raining, I hopped on the bus which had a stop right in front of the apartment complex. I rode downtown toward my office, the whole time staring at my wet shoes, wondering what the hell was going on. We have a keycard access to our building so only authorized personnel can get inside. I always keep my access card in my wallet, always. But, surprise, surprise, it wasn't there. I buzzed into the speaker we had for guests with appointments, or employees as a backup in case anyone lost or forgot their card. A voice came through the speaker, "Tim. You got cut out, what's your employee number?" "That's fine, just tell me your full name and department." "We don't have a Tim Brooks working in this building. Did you have an appointment with someone?" I backed up in surprise, almost tripping on my own feet. I had just been in that office an hour or 2 ago. What was happening to me? I felt like I was getting Alzheimer's but going through every stage in one day. I stared at my hands, unsure if I was in the right body. I felt like the world around me was disintegrating. I wasn't in control, I was merely sitting inside somebody else's head, watching the world through their eyes. I was astronomically close to just chucking my phone as far as I could in frustration. I took the jar out of my pocket. It looked unchanged, still glowing just as bright. "What the fuck did you do?" I yelled at the jar, realizing I probably looked like a lunatic. I looked down at my hand. I was still clutching the jar. The only memory of my entire life I could concretely remember was that girl giving it to me. Telling me it was happiness. It did not bring happiness. It brought pain. It brought suffering. I was more miserable in that moment than I'd ever been. My phone buzzed. That dark, chilly air accompanying the rain spread away like it was the shockwave of a bomb going off, and I was at the epicenter. I saw the warm, yellow light from inside the jar spread rapidly across the ground and ascend into the sky. It was as if I was watching the beginnings of the universe being created, like God had just snapped his fingers and said, "Let there be light." I was engulfed in it. I could no longer see street or rain, or anything dark. I felt like I was plummeting into a star going faster than the speed of light. It felt like sitting in front of a fire on a cold winter's night, but that warmth was covering every inch of my body.
You feel that? That weird pressure in the room? Yeah. That's the algorithm. It knows you're watching, and it gets real cranky when you don't feed it. A simple ritual helps. Click the little thumbs up, tap subscribe, say its name 3 times into your phone mic. Kidding, probably.
Engagement appeases the darkness. You know what to do.
Good, human. Now, back to the horror.
I don't know when you're going to read this, but I can tell you when it started. I was out for a walk alone in the woods when the entity came for me. It was beyond a blur. It was, for lack of a better term, absence of meaning. Where it hid, there were no trees. Where it crept closer, there was no grass. Through the arc it leapt at me, there was no breeze of motion. There was no air at all. As it struck, I felt the distinct sensation of claws puncturing me somewhere unseen, somewhere I'd never felt before. My hands and arms and legs and torso seemed fine and I wasn't bleeding, but I knew I'd been injured somehow. As I fearfully ran back home, I could tell that I was less. I was vaguely tired, and it was hard to focus at times. The solution at that early stage was easy. A big cup of coffee helped me feel normal again. It was almost as if the strong emotions of that first week made the entity fight back. It was still with me, latched on to some invisible part of my being. The first few incidents were minor, and I hardly worried about them. The color of a neighbor's car changed from dark blue to black one morning, and I stared at it before shaking my head and shrugging off the difference. 2 days later, at work, a coworker's name changed from Fred to Dan. I carefully asked around, but everyone said his name had always been Dan. I figured I'd just been mistaken. Then, as ridiculous as this sounds, I was peeing in my bathroom at home when I suddenly found myself on a random street. I was still in my pajamas, pants down, and urinating, but now in full view of a dozen people at a bus stop. Horrified, I pulled up my clothes and ran before someone called the cops. I did manage to get home, but the experience forced me to admit that I was still in danger. The entity was doing something to me, and I didn't understand how to fight back. "Hey," I asked her with confusion. "How'd you get a key?" The entity had eaten 3 months of my life. That fury helped suppress the entity. I never imbibed alcohol. I drank coffee religiously. I checked the date every time I woke up. For 3 years, I managed to live each day while observing nothing more than minor alterations. A social fact here and there, someone's job, how many kids they had, that sort of thing, the layout of nearby streets, the time my favorite television show aired, that kind of thing. Always, those changes reminded me the creature still had its claws sunk into my spirit. Not once in 3 years did I ever let myself zone out. One day, I grew careless. I let myself get really into the season finale of my favorite show. It was gripping, a fantastic story. Right at the height of the action, a young boy came up to my lounger and shook my arm. He laughed and smiled brightly. Silly daddy. The doctors didn't have any clue. Nothing showed up on all their scans and tests, but they happily took my money in return for nothing. By the time I ran out of options, I decided to tell March. There was no way to know what this all looked like from her side. What was I like when I wasn't there? Did I still take our son to school? Did I still do my job? Clearly, I did, because she seemed to be none the wiser, but I still had a horrible feeling that something must have been missing in her life when I wasn't actually home inside my own head. But the night I set up a nice dinner in preparation, she arrived not by unlocking the front door, but by knocking on it. I answered, and found that she was in a nice dress. She was happily surprised by the settings on the table. A fancy dinner for a second date? I knew you were sweet on me. Thank the Lord I knew when to keep my mouth shut. If I'd gone on about being married and having a son, she might have run for the hills. Instead, I took her coat and sat down for our second date. But of course I wouldn't be writing this if it hadn't gotten worse. The entity was still with me. It had not wounded me and departed like I'd wanted to believe. The closest I can describe my growing understanding was that the creature was burrowing deeper into my psyche, fracturing it into smaller pieces. Instead of months between major shifts, I began having only weeks. Once I noticed that trend, I feared my ultimate fate would be to jump between times in my life heartbeat by heartbeat, forever confused, forever lost. Only an instant in each time meant I would never be able to speak with anyone else, never be able to hold a conversation, never express or receive love. A teenager touched my arm. Grandpa. It seemed that we had relatives over. Was it Christmas? A pair of adults and a couple kids I didn't recognize tromped through the hallway, and I saw my son, now adult, walk by with his wife on the way out the door. As a group, the extended family began sledding outside. Well, it's terrible, I told him truthfully. But it's terrible for all the right reasons. You're still a young man, so your characters behave like young people, but the structure of the story itself is very solid. I paused. I didn't expect it to turn out to be a horror story. He nodded. It's a reflection of the times. Expectations for the future are dismal, not hopeful like they used to be. Sure. I read everything I can. I love it. For a teenager, he took it well. You're serious? Yes. Wow. Sounds like a plan. I was surprised. That made sense, and I hadn't expected him to have a serious response. But how will I get all the notes in one place? I peered after him. I heard him banging around near the stairs. Finally, he returned with a box, laid it on the carpet, and opened it to reveal a bursting stack of papers. He exclaimed, "Holy crap." But of course, being a teenager, he didn't really say crap. He looked up at me with wonder. Yeah. Or, you will. You still have to write them and put them under the stairs after this. He gazed back down at the papers, then covered the box. So you probably shouldn't see what they say. That could get weird. That much I understood. Right. He gulped. There are like 50 boxes under there, all filled up like this. Deciphering these will take a very long time. His tone dropped to deadly seriousness. But I will save you, Grandpa. Because I don't think anyone else can. Tears flowed down my cheeks then, and I couldn't help but sob once or twice. I hadn't realized how lonely I'd become in my shifting prison of awareness until I finally had someone who understood. Thank you. Thank you so much. And then I was young again, and at work on a random Tuesday. Once the sadness and relief faded, anger and determination replaced them. After I finished my work, I grabbed some paper and began writing. While the weeks shifted around me, while those weeks became days, and then hours, I wrote every single spare moment about when and where I thought I was. I put them under the stairs out of order. My first box was actually the 30th, and my last box was the first. Once I had over 50 boxes written from my perspective, and once my shifting became a matter of minutes, I knew it was up to my grandson to take it from there. Yes. He took me to a room filled with strange equipment and sat me in a rubber chair facing a large mirror twice the height of a man. The pattern finally revealed itself. The electric zap from his device was startling, but not painful. In the mirror, I saw a rapid arcing light silhouette appear above my head and shoulder. The electricity moved through the creature like a wave, briefly revealing the terrible nature of what was happening to me. A bulging leech-like mouth was wrapped around the back of my head, coming down to my eyebrows and touching each ear, and its slug-like body ran over my shoulder and into my very soul. And it was feeding on my mind. My now-adult grandson held my hand as I took in the horror. After a moment, he asked, "Removing it is going to hurt very badly. Are you up for this?" Fearful, I asked, "Is Mar here?" He made a sympathetic noise of understanding and then returned to his machines to hook several wires, diodes, and other bits of technology to my limbs and forehead. While he did so, he talked. "I've worked for 2 decades to figure this out, and I've had a ton of help from other researchers of the occult. This parasite doesn't technically exist in our plane. It's one of the lesser spawns of Set, and it feeds on the plexus of mind, soul, and quantum consciousness/reality. When details like names and colors of objects changed, you weren't going crazy. The web of your existence was merely losing strands as the creature ate its way through you." I could still see Mar's smile. Even though she was dead, I'd just been with her moments ago. "Do it." The click of a switch echoed in my ears, and I almost laughed at how mild the electricity was. It didn't feel like anything, at least at first. Then, I saw the mirror shaking, and my body within that image convulsing. Oh. No. It did hurt. Nothing had ever been more painful. It was just so excruciating that my mind hadn't been able to immediately process it. I'd never managed to be there for the birth of my son. I'd jumped around it a dozen times, but never actually lived it. For the first time, I got to hold Mar's hand and be there for her. My scream faded into a surprised shout as the machines and electricity and chair faded away. Snow was no longer falling around my life. I was out in the woods on a bright summer day. Oh God! I turned to see the creature approaching me. It was the same absence of meaning, the same blank on reality. It crept forward, just like before, but, this time, it hissed and turned away. I stood, astounded at being young again and freed from the parasite. My grandson had actually done it. He'd made me an unappetizing meal, so the predator of mind and soul had moved on in search of a different snack. But all I could see was her lying in that hospital bed dying. It was going to end in unspeakable pain and loneliness. I would become an old man, left to sit by myself in an empty house, his soulmate gone long before him. At the end of it all, the only thing I would have left, sitting and watching the falling snow. Even though I already knew. Author's note: together, my grandfather and I did set out to write the tale of his life. Unfortunately, his Alzheimer's disease progressed rapidly, and we were never able to finish. He's still alive, but I imagine that, mentally, he is in a better place than the nursing home. I like to think he's back in his younger days, living life and being happy, because the reality is much colder. It's snowing today. He loves the snow. When I visited him, he didn't recognize me, but he did smile as he sat looking out the window.
Anyway, let's lighten the mood with something fun and... Nah, just kidding. It gets worse. Hit it.
My new neighborhood has only one rule: never, under any circumstances, help a lost pet, by Shohinkter. The house was a steal. That should have been the first red flag. A 3-bedroom craftsman with a wraparound porch for less than the cost of my cramped 2-bedroom apartment. It was in a quiet, secluded subdivision called Maple Creek, where all the lawns were impossibly green and the neighbors waved with all 5 fingers. The HOA president, a woman named Carol with a smile as bright and hard as a porcelain doll's, met me on my first day. She handed me a welcome basket with a bottle of cheap Chardonnay and a single, laminated sheet of paper. "We're so glad to have you, Mark," she said, her eyes crinkling in a way that didn't seem genuine. "We're very relaxed here at Maple Creek. We don't have rules about lawn height or fence colors. We only have one." For the first month, it was perfect. Quiet. Peaceful. I almost forgot about the bizarre rule. I'd see people walking their dogs on leashes, cats sunning themselves on porches. They were clearly owned, clearly where they were supposed to be. The rule seemed like a weird quirk from a bygone era. It was a real gully washer, with thunder that shook the windows and rain that came down in sheets. It was around midnight when I heard it, a sound that cut through the noise of the storm. A pathetic, high-pitched whine. I peered through my living room window. Huddled under the eave of my porch, shivering and soaked, was a golden retriever. It was beautiful, with big, sad eyes and a leather collar, but no tags. Every time the thunder cracked, it would press itself against my door and cry. Knock. 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 A slow, deliberate knock on my front door. The rain had stopped. The dog on the floor lifted its head, let out a low growl, and then, strangely, trotted to the door, its tail giving a single, lazy wag. I opened the door a crack, my hand still on the chain. "Can I help you?" "Good evening," the man said, his voice smooth and pleasant. "I do apologize for the late hour. I believe you found my dog." He gestured with his head toward the retriever, who was now sitting patiently at his feet, looking up at him. "Oh, yeah, he was out in the storm," I said, my relief making me feel foolish for ever being scared. "Glad you found him." He straightened up, his towering frame seeming to block out all the light from the porch. My mind screamed at me to slam the door. Slam it, lock it, run. But my body wouldn't obey. I was a statue, my hand frozen on the door. The man's smile never faltered as he gave the door a gentle push. The brass security chain didn't snap or break. It stretched, elongating like taffy with a soft, metallic groan before falling away, limp and useless. The air was different out here. The storm had washed everything clean, but the world felt muted, like I was looking at it through a pane of smoked glass. The streetlights cast long, distorted shadows that seemed to writhe and twist at the edges of my vision. As we walked, I noticed other things. "Don't mind them," the tall man said, noticing my gaze. "They're very good at following the rules." We were heading toward the end of the cul-de-sac, to the oldest house on the block, a large colonial that had been dark and seemingly empty since I'd moved in. As we got closer, I could feel a low vibration through the soles of my shoes, a deep hum that seemed to emanate from the house itself. The golden retriever led the procession up the walkway and sat patiently before the heavy oak door. The other animals formed a silent, semicircle behind us, their eyes all fixed on me.
Whew, talent gave me chills. But hey, we're just getting started. The next one's sharper. You'll see.
My uncle left me a tropical paradise with some important rules to follow, by Born Command 2758. backslash 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 backslash. If you are reading this, it means my long life has finally drawn to a close and I must pass along the family estate to my most eligible next of kin, which is you. Being a single man in his youth with few social obligations, you are the prime candidate to undergo this venture. Just imagine it, your own private island with a lavish mansion, breathtaking scenery, full amenities, even Wi-Fi, and never having to work another day in your life. And all you have to do to leave the dreary world of the 9-to-5 wage slave, is pack your bags. But I think I'm getting ahead of things. Allow me to introduce myself. You have never met me, but I am your father's great Uncle Stanley, your grandmother Constance's cousin. Given my less than respectable lifestyle in my youth, and my disappearance 60 years ago, it would be no surprise if the memory of me had been conveniently swept under the rug. I gather my life before undertaking this lifelong vacation bears similarity to yours. I kept to myself with little social interaction, had disinterest in work and studies, and had nothing to occupy my time but my vices. And much like yourself and those before me, I was in my early 20s when I got a letter from a forgotten relative with the deal of a lifetime. Since then, my entire life has been spent in luxury and peaceful isolation. I kept up to date with the outside world through newspapers, television, and the internet. Supplies arrive regularly at the dock, and I have never found myself wanting. I enjoyed many hobbies such as fishing, swimming, gardening, island chores, and even did a spot of writing. Should you accept the responsibility, a car will pick you up at first light the day after you open and read this letter. You'll know it when you see it. Don't ask how it knows to come, just be ready at the curb with your belongings. Don't leave anything behind you want to lose, as you won't be coming back. From there, you will be driven to port, where your driver will point out the ship waiting to take you to your new home. The crew will load your belongings. Under no circumstances are you to offer to help them, but do be sure to thank them for their services. They're persnickety about these things, and besides you're about to begin a new life of leisure, no point in throwing all that away by becoming the newest member of the crew. When you arrive at the island, the crew will unload your belongings into a golf cart with a storage trunk parked near the dock for your convenience. It is now safe to assist them if you so desire. Be sure to thank them again for their services and wish them well. Shake the captain's hand, but do not do so with the helmsman. Stay at the dock and watch until they sail out of sight. If you happen to see the ship capsize, check the mooring post on your right. If the time matches what was carved into the wood, then there is nothing to worry about. If it doesn't, note the time for later, then begin making your way along the path to the mansion up the hill. From the dining hall, you will walk into the main foyer. Take your time to appreciate the marble staircase, and see if you can make out the faint impressions left by feet from 3 centuries of our family treading up and down them. Make your way up to the 3rd floor landing and take a right. The opulent door at the end of the hall is the master bedroom, but do not enter, as the custodian sleeps there between tenants and values his privacy. Instead, politely knock 3 times, and announce that you are the new occupant and will be requiring him to return to his assigned quarters by the morning. Then, return downstairs to the dining hall, where your own dinner will be waiting for you at the main table. Sincerely, Great Uncle Stanley. Backslash 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 backslash. I still had the login for the family tree service my grandmother got for us before her passing, and sure enough, I did have a great Uncle Stanley, although there was next to nothing about him other than his name. While it could be, and probably is, a scam, I gotta admit, it's not like I've got a lot to lose. My job sucks ass, and I've had to sell most of my belongings just to cover the rent in this glorified storage unit of an apartment. I haven't been close with most of my family in years, not since I was falsely accused of SA in high school because the popular girl was bored. Same incident lost me the few friends I had, so my social circle is non-existent too. I only have a small backpack, but it can fit what few clothes and possessions I have easily enough.
Alright, quick break before our next story. Let's check in with our resident spooky dude. Hey, you ever smile, or is your face just stuck that way?
I smiled once. The sky bled. A child vanished. Never again.
Okay, drama. Maybe next time just try a dad joke.
Knock knock. They never made it to the door.
Wow. Fine, stay moody. Anyways, back to the darkness. This next one's got teeth.
So I sent an email. Half an hour later I had a response, telling me to go to a particular office building in an upscale part of the city at a precise time for my screening. I went, and after waiting for a few minutes in the lobby, I was taken into an office where I was given a series of forms and questionnaires to fill out. They collected them and told me they would be in touch. I had almost forgotten about the whole thing until a month later I got a call saying I had moved on to the second stage of the hiring process. I was again given an address and time, and when I arrived, this time it was a different nice office parked 20 miles away from the first one. I was met by a man who introduced himself as Mr. Solomon. He escorted me into a large room that contained a chair and a desk. On the desk were two large monitors, a keyboard and mouse, and a bolted-down metal box with two oversized buttons on it, one red and one green. He told me this room was a model for the place I would be working if I took the job. He described the job as follows. As for what I was to do in the surveillance room, I was told that the monitor on the left would constantly show a live stream from a high-definition camera in a remote location. My job was simply to watch the camera. Once an hour I would get onto the computer attached to the right monitor and enter a brief log describing anything interesting that occurred in the last hour. I would have no pens or pencils or paper, and I should never try to take any kind of written notes about the work. As for the red and green buttons, the red button was only to be used if there was an emergency. This meant something on the video or in my workspace that required outside help. The green button was to be hit if I saw something on the video feed that was particularly noteworthy. It would tell other people somewhere that, at least in my opinion, something interesting was going on. Solomon stressed that while I was given discretion on when to use this button, should err on the side of only using it if and when something of real significance occurred. He pointed out the camera on the ceiling of the room we were in. He said the real room would be the same. My work would be observed, and other people were watching the room on the video feed as well. He said I was only a redundancy in case other systems failed. He then smirked and asked if I knew what he meant by redundancy. I nodded, trying not to show my irritation. I don't talk that good to people, so sometimes they think I'm dumb. That's okay. Let him think that if he paid me good enough. This worried me. I was already thinking this was some kind of psych experiment or secret government job, which I was okay with. But that kind of money to sit and watch a screen. My mom always told me that if something seems too good to be true, it probably is, and this was seeming too good to be true. I asked if I was going to be doing anything illegal. Solomon laughed and said no. I asked if anyone was going to get hurt. Again, he shook his head no. He said the reason they were paying so much was because they needed employees that were motivated to be professional and discreet. The work they were doing was important, and for various reasons it couldn't be discussed. If I took the job, I would have to sign papers promising I would never discuss my work there or I could be sued or locked up. I'm only breaking that now because of everything that's happened. So I took the job, and because they wanted me to start right away, I had to quit the store with no notice. I felt bad about that, but I was excited about the new job too. It was a lot of money and seemed like easy enough work, if a bit boring. I was nervous that there was something more to it, but I told myself I would just have to see. No point in chickening out and wasting a good chance because I let my imagination go crazy. I was given the location of the job itself, and when I went there, I was amazed that it really was just like the model room I had been shown with only a few differences. There was a locker room you had to pass through to enter the surveillance room, and there was a small bathroom attached to the real surveillance room also. The real room had a small water cooler in the corner, but because I wasn't allowed to bring anything in with me, I had to eat before or after every shift. The biggest difference, of course, was that the monitors were turned on. The right monitor was just a black and white terminal like you see in movies sometimes. I could type in my logs, but no internet to look at or anything like that. The left monitor. She looked to be a little older than me and was very pretty. When I first saw her, she was laying on her side on the sofa. That was the part of the room farthest from the camera, but the picture was very clear and I could tell that she was sleeping. I found myself leaning into the monitor more so I could see her better, and then I thought about what I was doing and felt embarrassed. It's like I was spying on her. A peeping Tom, my mom used to call it. I didn't want to be a peeping Tom, but I didn't want to be silly either. I needed to think about it slow. It was a good job. And I wasn't doing anything wrong, right? I wasn't hurting anybody. The woman looked fine. And the room was nice. She probably agreed to be there and it's all some experiment or something. I was just overreacting. Except I was scared. Scared of losing my job, and scared of what these people might do to me if I quit or told on them. Solomon had told me when I took the job that part of being discreet was not asking questions. I would never be asked to do more than I had already been told, but I could never tell anyone what I did or saw, and I could never ask questions about what I was doing or why. So I made excuses. It was all an experiment. She was crazy or sick and they were trying to help her. She was doing a job just like I was. Or if she really was a prisoner somewhere, at least I was watching to make sure that she was okay. If they ever tried to hurt her, or I saw that she really didn't want to be there for sure, I could get help then. In a way, I told myself, I was helping to protect her by watching. I don't expect you to think much of my excuses. I don't think much of them myself, especially now. But in my defense, when things changed, I didn't ignore it or try to explain it away. I knew something had to be done. Rachel would usually paint for an hour or two every day, and it seemed to always be during my afternoon shifts. The room had no windows as far as I could tell, but I guess she either used a clock or her own body's time to keep to a kind of schedule. I always liked to watch her paint. The thing she was painting was always facing the wrong way for me to see it, but I could see her face as she worked. She always looked peaceful and happy when she was painting, and seeing her that way, smiling serenely from time to time as she got something the way she wanted it, always made my day. But it was more than her being focused. Something was wrong. She didn't look happy and she was going for hours at a time. In the span of 3 days, she had finished 4 paintings. I had been growing more and more worried watching her work, and when she finished the 4th, I found myself telling her to just stop and rest a while. I had grown accustomed to talking to the monitor, talking to her in my own way. But she didn't stop. Instead she began moving the paintings. Arranging them on the back and seat of the long sofa at the far end of the room. This was the first time I had gotten to see any of the paintings. Even when the others were taking them out, they always seemed to be turned away from the camera. I was still worried about her, but I was also happy to finally see something she had worked on. Happy and amazed. Help. Me. Thomas.
Still with us? Good. That last one was just the warm-up. Let's go deeper.
I'm a search and rescue officer for the U.S. Forest Service. I have some stories to tell, by search and rescue woods. A few times, I've been out on my own searching with a canine, and they've tried to lead me straight up cliffs. Not hills, not even rock faces. Straight, sheer cliffs with no possible handholds. It's always baffling, and in those cases we usually find the person on the other side of the cliff, or miles away from where the canine has led us. I'm sure there's an explanation, but it's sort of strange. I was teamed up with another SAR officer because we'd received reports of bears in the area. We were looking for a guy who hadn't come home from a climbing trip when he was supposed to, and we ended up having to do some serious climbing to get to where we figured he'd be. We found him trapped in a small crevasse with a broken leg. It was not pleasant. He'd been there for almost 2 days, and his leg was very obviously infected. We were able to get him into a chopper, and I heard from one of the EMTs that the guy was absolutely inconsolable. He kept talking about how he'd been doing fine, and when he'd gotten to the top, a man had been there. He said the guy had no climbing equipment, and he was wearing a parka and ski pants. He walked up to the guy, and when the guy turned around, he said he had no face. It was just blank. He freaked out, and ended up trying to get off the mountain too fast, which is why he'd fallen. He said he could hear the guy all night, climbing down the mountain and letting out these horrible muffled screams. That story bothered the hell out of me. I'm glad I wasn't there to hear it. One of the scariest things I've ever had happen to me involved the search for a young woman who'd gotten separated from her hiking group. We were out until late at night, because the dogs had picked up her scent. When we found her, she was curled up under a large rotted log. She was missing her shoes and pack, and she was clearly in shock. She didn't have any injuries, and we were able to get her to walk with us back to base ops. Along the way, she kept looking behind us and asking us why that big man with black eyes was following us. We couldn't see anyone, so we just wrote it off as some weird symptom of shock. But the closer we got to base, the more agitated this woman got. She kept asking me to tell him to stop making faces at her. At one point she stopped and turned around and started yelling into the forest, saying that she wanted him to leave her alone. She wasn't going to go with him, she said, and she wouldn't give us to him. We finally got her to keep moving, but we started hearing these weird noises coming from all around us. It was almost like coughing, but more rhythmic and deeper. It was almost insect-like, I don't really know how else to describe it. When we were within sight of base ops, the woman turns to me, and her eyes are about as wide as I can imagine a human could open them. She touches my shoulder and says, "He says to tell you to speed up. He doesn't like looking at the scar on your neck." I have a very small scar on the base of my neck, but it's mostly hidden under my collar, and I have no idea how this woman saw it. Right after she says it, I hear that weird coughing right in my ear, and I just about jumped out of my skin. I hustled her to ops, trying not to show how freaked out I was, but I have to say I was really happy when we left the area that night. This is the last one I'll tell, and it's probably the weirdest story I have. Now, I don't know if this is true in every SAR unit, but in mine, it's sort of an unspoken, regular thing we run into. You can try asking about it with other SAR officers, but even if they know what you're talking about, they probably won't say anything about it. We've been told not to talk about it by our superiors, and at this point we've all gotten so used to it that it doesn't even seem weird anymore. On just about every case where we're really far into the wilderness, I'm talking 30 or 40 miles, at some point we'll find a staircase in the middle of the woods. It's almost like if you took the stairs in your house, cut them out, and put them in the forest. I asked about it the first time I saw some, and the other officer just told me not to worry about it, that it was normal. Everyone I asked said the same thing. I wanted to go check them out, but I was told, very emphatically, that I should never go near any of them. I just sort of ignore them now when I run into them because it happens so frequently. I have a lot more stories, and I suppose if anyone's interested, I'll tell some of them tomorrow. If anyone has any theories about the stairs, or if you've seen them too, let me know. Edit, Part 2 is up.
That last one tasted like fear and poor decisions. Let's see what the next bite stirs. Hope you're hungry.
I moved in with my boyfriend yesterday. We've been together for 5 years now and we're old and wise enough to settle down and finally leave our parents' houses. He just turned 24 and I'm 22. He's the love of my life. His name is Jamie and I couldn't be happier to be living with him. When we decided to make the leap, we spent 2 months looking at flats and houses. We couldn't afford to buy yet, so renting was our only option, but the prices were astronomical. For our budget, we would have been lucky to get a box room and a stove. We knew that for our budget and location we weren't going to get any better. We snapped the place up fast, not even bothering to view it. It felt like our only chance. Move-in day rolled around quickly and yesterday we got the keys to our first home together. It was such a strange feeling. The day was chaos, getting our stuff in and up in the lift. We were flat number 42, on the 7th floor. The items we couldn't get in the lift had to be taken up all the stairs by the removal men. I think they were grateful we weren't any higher, but I still wish we had been able to give them a better tip. In the evening we settled down on our second-hand sofa, given to us by a cousin of a friend, and watched some TV. We smoked cigarettes on the balcony looking at the park and fell asleep on our mattress on the floor super early because we had no energy to put the bed together yet and Jamie had work at a hideous time of the morning. Firstly, welcome to your new home. I lived here before you for 35 years with my husband. Unfortunately, he had an incident at home recently that I'd rather not discuss that claimed his life. My sister has now decided I can't keep up with the demands of the property and has insisted that I move in with her and her husband. I was reluctant at first, but the stairs do kill me at my age, and without Bernie it's filled with sadness. Anyway, when you've lived somewhere for as long as I have, it feels like a person that you know. You understand its personality and what makes it tick. I thought it was probably pertinent that I impart some of that knowledge on you. 3. When you hear the strange animal noises coming from flat 48, don't question it. Mr. Prentice lives there and he's a lovely chap. Don't be afraid to say hello to him in the corridor or on the stairs. He's old school, so he never risks the lift, but whatever you do, don't check on him when you hear the noises. You'll know when you hear them. 7. Simple one for you here, keep a weapon in each room. Sometimes you follow all these steps and something still slips through the net. Better to be safe than sorry. 9. Stray hairless cats sometimes roam in the hallway. I know they're supposedly a special, expensive breed, but they don't belong to anyone. They're mostly harmless, but don't pick them up. Not unless you see one of those neighbors that claims to live in 65 to 72. Then grab the cat and lock it inside with you. It'll burn your skin a little, but the cats are friendly and I wouldn't want to see them hurt. 10. There is no way to fix the damp patch on the ceiling in the bedroom. Sometimes it will turn a deep crimson and look quite concerning, but please try not to be alarmed. It doesn't drip, it doesn't get any bigger, and it's been there longer than I have. The landlord won't budge on it, according to the agents. I flagged it many times, even called the police the first night it changed color, but it was a waste of time, and it will be for you too. It's best to ignore it. 11. You can trust the postman. His name is Ian Flanders and he's been the postman since before I moved in. He has his own key to the main door and delivers post to the door every morning at 8:54. I can't include everything here, or it would become a novel, but if you have any questions Ian will help you. 12. Finally, the first few weeks are the worst. You'll feel like you've made a mistake. I'm sure reading this you already do, but if you can get through the first few weeks it really is a lovely block to live in. Every property has its quirks and this one is a little extra special, but you can be truly happy here if you just take my advice. I wish you all the best, I really do. Yours truly, Mrs. Prudence Hemmings. I don't really know what to think after reading the note. Hopefully it was some sort of joke, but the agent had said the previous tenant was an elderly lady and I can't see anyone named Prudence Hemmings attempting to play practical jokes on someone they'd never met. Our dream, our beautiful little home had just become a source of fear and confusion. I checked the time and it was 9:14. Damn it. Out of time to catch Postman Ian. When I opened the door to check, sure enough, 2 letters addressed to a Mrs. Hemming sat on the doorstep. At about 11:15 my worst fears were truly confirmed when a friendly middle-aged looking man carrying window cleaning equipment knocked on my balcony door. I ignored him. I didn't want to take the risk until I'd spoken to Jamie and showed him the note. I'd texted him already to rush home. I felt bad as the man rapped his knuckles against the door for over 10 minutes, but honestly the longer it went on the more I was terrified. My windows were sparkling, and due to our lack of curtains I couldn't even hide from his gaze. I felt so exposed. He stayed for a total of 30 minutes exactly and never once did he stop looking at me or knocking. He shouted the occasional ultra-friendly line or humble request for a beverage in the heat through the door, but I did my best to avoid eye contact. When he finally left I looked outside every window in the flat, but I couldn't see him on any of the other balconies or see any equipment suggesting he was around. He had vanished completely. I thought about it, what could have happened? And then it hit me. Jamie's shift started at 4 a.m. today. He would have left the flat at 3:15 and taken the lift down the stairs. I don't know what to do. I've tried to convince myself it was all just a big joke. Maybe Jamie wrote the note and got his boss in on it. A voice in my head kept telling me that he couldn't write like that if he tried, but I had to attempt to fool myself. It's getting late and he still isn't home. What if it's all true? I think we made a big mistake. My next steps. And what happened after that?
You're still tuned to HorrorSlop. Frequency unknown. Stories endless. Let's spin the next nightmare.
If you're armed and at the Glenmont Metro, please shoot me, by Sarcassonomicon. Make it a headshot. Shoot me in the temple, aiming slightly downwards. I need the bullet to travel the shortest possible distance through my brain before it hits my hippocampus. If I'm lucky, the sensation of the gunshot ripping through my skull will only last a few decades. My ordeal started over 10,000 years ago, at 10:15 this morning. I earn extra money by participating in drug trials. I'm a so-called healthy subject who takes experimental drugs to help assess side effects. Once it was a kidney drug. A few times it's been something for blood pressure or cholesterol. This morning they told me the drug I took was a psychoactive substance intended to accelerate brain function. Today's drug was different. This shit worked. They gave me a pill at 10:15 and told me to hang out in the waiting room until they called me back for some tests. Only about 30 minutes, the research assistant told me. I flopped onto the waiting room couch and read a few articles from a copy of Psychology Today that was sitting on the coffee table. They hadn't called me back when I finished the Psychology Today, so I picked up a US News and read it cover to cover. Then I read an old Scientific American. What was taking them so damn long? I scanned the old books on the shelf and picked out a copy of Moby Dick. My arms had the same problems as my legs. Just reaching one foot in front of me to grab the book took a long time. I actually got bored just waiting for my hand to reach the spine of the book. I slogged back to the couch and collapsed onto it in a slow-motion fall that reminded me of the low-gravity hops of astronauts on the moon. I opened Moby Dick, slowly, and began reading. I started with Call Me Ishmael and got as far as Ahab throwing his pipe into the sea, which was all the way to friggin' chapter 30, before they called me back. How are you feeling? The research assistant asked me. Actually, it's the other way around. Everything seems slow because you're so fast. But my legs. My arms. They're moving in slow motion. Your body seems like it's moving slowly because your brain is fast. Your brain is running 10 or 20 times faster than normal. You are thinking and perceiving reality at an accelerated pace. But your body is still constrained by the laws of biomechanics. Frankly, you're moving much faster than a normal person, she pantomimed a jogging motion. But your brain is running so much faster right now, that even your fast walk seems very slow to you. I thought about my slow-motion flop onto the waiting room couch. Even if my muscles had slowed down, my body would still react to gravity the same way. But in the waiting room, I even fell in slow motion. Slow muscles couldn't explain why gravity seemed weaker. My brain was going at warp 10. That's how I managed to read 3 magazines and the first 30 chapters of Moby Dick in 15 minutes. Then they sent me home. It'll wear off in a few hours, they said. Which will seem like days to you. Try to use the residual effects to get some work done. Catch up on work emails while you're still in high-speed mode. The huge disconnect between my body and mind made it extremely difficult to judge how and when to slow down, turn, or rotate my body. I had basically turned into giant, slow-motion spaz. I misjudged my speed and rammed into the wall by the elevator button at a pretty good speed. Even though I could see the wall coming at me, I couldn't make my finger, outstretched to hit the elevator button, move away fast enough, and I jammed it against the wall. Hard. The pain was intense. If my brain had been running at regular speed, it probably only would have hurt for 30 seconds or so. But in my accelerated state, the intense pain seemed to last for half an hour. 45 minutes maybe. The elevator ride was horrible. It felt like I spent 4 or 5 hours just descending 7 floors, with nothing to look at but the interior of the elevator car. I spent an hour, in my time frame, descending into the subway and running to the platform. Endless tedium waiting the 6 minutes for the Red Line train to arrive. Although there was more to look at on the metro platform than inside the elevator, it was still intensely boring. I should have stolen that copy of Moby Dick. Back at the research offices, I could still hear and communicate with the research staff. But now verbal communication with anyone would be impossible. The effects of the drug were still intensifying. I dipped into my pile of yet-to-be-read books and finished 2 more. 4 more minutes had passed. I decided to try to sleep off the remaining effects of the drug. Unfortunately, whatever part of my mind is responsible for perception, the part that's been accelerated to hyper speeds by the drug, isn't the same as the part that governs sleep. Despite being awake for what I perceived as days, my physical brain still thought it was 1:25 p.m. It was not ready for sleep. So I took an Ambien. The sensation of the pill and the splash of water I used to swallow it sliding my throat was sickening. A lump that blocked my breathing, moving like a slug down my esophagus. I exited my apartment as fast as possible, taking hours in my time frame to do so. I didn't even bother locking the door. It would have taken too long. Sprinting down the street, dancing and weaving between pedestrians with, what must have looked to them, superhuman dexterity. Down the first flight of stairs at the metro. Across the landing. Another hour. Then on to the second flight of stairs. That's when the Ambien hit me. The Ambien didn't make me sleepy. Not at all. Instead, it must have had a severe cross-reaction with the experimental drug I took this morning. I was bounding down the second flight of stairs, moving in slow motion, but still making perceptible progress. Then, wham, everything stopped. Despite these efforts, I rolled my ankle on the next step. The pain wasn't at all mitigated by the slowness. Hours of increasing strain on my bent ankle. The nerve signals that send pain into the brain must work differently than the nerves in my ear. Sonic energy was spread out over time, diluted until it was imperceptible. Pain flowed into my brain undiluted by the change in my perception of time. Hours and hours of increasing weight on my turned ankle turned into hours of increasing pain upon increasing pain. By the time I hit the ground, I had a plan. I would somehow get to the platform and throw myself in front of a train. I twisted onto my hands and knees. Days of my dislocated shoulder crying for relief. I misjudged my rotation and rolled onto my back. I tried again, collapsing onto my face as I tried to figure out how to control a body that moved slower than grass grew. Weeks of effort were finally rewarded with success. I stabilized on my hands and knees. My hyper-accelerated mind wasted no time compensating for the lack of sensory input. Voices spoke to me. They sung to me in languages that never existed. Patterns and faces and colors came and went in my mind's eye. I recalled my whole life, and imagined living another. I forgot English. I settled into a profound despair. I spoke to God. I became God. I imagined a new universe and brought it to life with my thoughts. Then I did it all again. And again. I extracted my phone from my pocket. A project that spanned decades. How can I even explain the boredom? The pain in my shoulder is nothing compared to the boredom. Every thought I can think, I have thought hundreds of times already. The view of ankles and advertisements never changes. Never. The boredom is so intense it's tangible, like a solid object of metal and stone wedged into my skull. Inescapable. I've lived hundreds of lifespans at the foot of this bench. I am far older, in spirit, than any human who has ever lived. Most of my life experience has been a snapshot of pain huddled on the floor of a subway platform, with an unchanging view of ankles and advertisements. This post is my plan B. My Hail Mary. My long shot. I've spent lifetimes typing and posting this message in the hope that someone will read it and become convinced that my suffering must end. Someone on this platform right now. Someone who will find the man curled under the bench, the man who crawled down the escalator, and kill him as swiftly as possible. A bullet to the temple. If you're armed and at the Glenmont Metro, please shoot me.
Still here? Aw, look at you. Brave little meatbag. Too late to back out now. Next story's already watching.
Her real name was Megan Daniels, but nobody actually called her that. She'd been Space Girl since grade 2. She was the kind of kid who stuck out in the crowd with her long red hair, ghostly pale skin and Coke bottle glasses. For as long as I'd known her, Space Girl had been quiet. She didn't like to be around us. She didn't play with us when we were kids, she didn't even talk much. Most of the time, she'd find somewhere to sit, far away from everyone else. Then she'd open up her little notebook and scribble inside of it. Sometimes she wrote poems, sometimes she drew. But she was always off on her own little world. Nowadays, I understand why we targeted her. She was different, and she was alone. That doesn't justify any of it, but kids can be cruel. I remember that it was Sasha Brown who told me that Space Girl was retarded because her mother was on drugs. She probably just made that up. But we all believed it. She had always been the worst toward Space Girl, and she kept that up until the end. Wow. You can't even draw. Look at this. And number X200B. After that, Space Girl became an easy target for Sasha and Tanya. Every chance they got, they'd harass her, and I regret to admit that I was usually right there with them. Can you draw me? Sasha asked once. I heard that retards were always like art geniuses or something. Maybe it'll even look like a person. And number X200B. It was late December in 7th grade where things got even worse. I don't know all the details, and I don't know just for how long things had been boiling over, but I'd heard a rumor that James Hardy had it out for Space Girl. We were coming in from recess when some boys decided to pull a little prank on James. The whole prank had been set up by Brian Jordan and his brother Mike. They had some mistletoe for the holiday season, and had set it up in the hall leading back to our classroom. Mike had grabbed Space Girl during recess and were holding her behind the door where the mistletoe was. When James walked through, they pushed her at him and snapped a picture. I'd been just behind James when it happened. I watched as Space Girl came flying out of seemingly nowhere, eyes wide and afraid, then slammed into James. They both hit the ground, and I could hear the other boys laughing. "Look! She wanted to give you a kiss," one of the boys said. Space Girl was trying to crawl away from James and pick up her notebook, but somebody had kicked it out of sight. I remember that she looked back towards James, and there were tears in her eyes. She must have been terrified with everything that was going on. She clearly hadn't wanted any part in this, but there she was at the center of it. "You fucking faggot assholes!" James yelled as he picked himself up. On Christmas Eve, there was a car accident on the highway outside of my town. Supposedly it had swerved off the road to avoid an animal of some kind, and gone into a ditch. Mike, Brian, and their parents didn't survive. On December 27th, James was killed while outside shoveling his driveway. My parents told me that he'd been attacked by an animal. Probably a deer or something. But that seemed so unusual. I'd never heard anything about deer attacking people before. Especially not in my area. "Hey!" Kept me waiting. She said when I knocked on the door. "Sorry. It's fine. I'll be ready in a bit. Come on upstairs, I want to show you something." I didn't question what it was. I figured it was just something else she'd gotten for Christmas, so I went upstairs with her. She led me to her bedroom, and as soon as she opened the door, I spotted a familiar notebook on her desk. "Where did you get this?" I asked, walking closer to it. "Space Girl dropped it when Brian and his brother pulled that prank the other day, she dropped it. I may have grabbed it. You know. Just for safekeeping." She cracked a wry grin, before opening the notebook. She paused at one small picture that was labeled "The Unicorn Prince." It depicted an empty field with a blank space where the titular prince should have been. Sasha flipped through the pages a little more until she got to the newer ones. I figured since they kicked Space Girl out for a little while, and her mom is too poor to get her anything for the holidays, I'd step up. "What do you think?" Sasha wasn't anywhere near as good of an artist as Space Girl was, but the simple detail in what she had drawn turned my stomach. Sasha giggled as I flipped through her crude depictions of suicide. There were pages of them. I closed the notebook and looked over at Sasha. "You just drew her killing herself over and over again." I took the book off her desk. "Do you not understand what's wrong with that?" Sasha just stared at me like I was crazy. "No." And number X200B. I spent the rest of the Christmas break terrified that my parents would get a call from Sasha's. I'd pushed her, and that seemed like such a big deal at the time. In hindsight, I doubt Sasha would have told her parents what had happened. They would have asked why I'd pushed her, and I would have told them about the notebook. On some level, she must have known that what she'd done was wrong. She was a cruel person, but there was a limit. Part of me hoped that she'd realize that I was right and we could patch things up when school started again, but honestly I wasn't so sure. And number X200B. On the first day back to school, I was up early. I made sure the notebook was packed into my bag and was out as early as I could be. The snow on the ground was almost pristine as I walked to school, but I remember seeing some tracks on my lawn, headed down the side of my house. Deep U-shaped indents that looked like they'd been made by hooves. A deer perhaps? I didn't dwell on them and made my way down the freshly shoveled sidewalk and back to school. She didn't respond. Sasha took it. I was over at her house the other day and she showed it to me. I had to take some pages out, but she drew some really awful things in there. I didn't think it would be right to give it back with those things in there. I paused, feeling smaller as Space Girl stared at me. She didn't seem angry or thankful. She didn't seem anything at all. Just stoic. I'm sorry if I wasn't all that great to you before, I said, and then I shuffled off to my desk. Space Girl waited until I sat down before she opened her notebook and inspected it. Then she closed her new book, and started something new on a fresh page in her old one. It wasn't much, but it made me feel at least a little good for what I'd done. And number X200B. When Sasha got in, she didn't talk to me. She didn't even look at me. Neither did Tanya or any of our other mutual friends. I knew from the moment they walked in that I'd burned my bridges with them. But I still wanted to try. The teacher hadn't come in yet, so I figured it might be worth it to try and talk to Sasha. I got up to move closer to her and she gave me a look of utter disgust. "What do you want?" she spat. "Fuck off and leave us alone." Tanya said, "You'd obviously rather hang out with the fucking retard than us, and I really don't want you spreading your retard germs to us. It's a quarantine issue." I stared at both of them, and I could have sworn I knew how Space Girl felt. What was I supposed to say to any of that? Instead, I just returned to my desk without a word. Space Girl stared at me the entire time. Her pencil rested over her notebook, but she didn't write anything. She set it down, tore out the page she'd been writing on and jammed it into her pocket. I later saw her toss it into the trash during lunch. And number X200B. Your words. There is a land where your sorry may go. The snow is putrid in color and smell. Its substance, filth and things I won't tell. One day your boyfriend will visit once more. This place in your carcass, this humanoid hell. Your sorry can go there to this hole in your shell. Is take your apology and stuff it up your ass. 8th grade wasn't fun for me. I had very few friends left, and Sasha never forgave me for turning on her. Her version of the story was slowly warped as time went on. First I'd punched her and stolen the book. Then I'd tried to kiss her, punched her when she'd refused, then stole the book to try and get her in trouble. Rumors of me being a dyke spread pretty quickly, and hot on their heels came the rumors that I was dating Space Girl. I tried not to let them bother me too much. I knew the truth, and at the end of the day, I'd done the right thing. And number X200B. Sasha's bullying never let up, of course. Of course she stalked Space Girl to the library where she'd pull the same old shit she'd been pulling since the 5th grade. She'd leer over her cubicle and comment on her drawings, picking them apart just like she always had. I stopped her whenever I saw it, but I didn't always see it. Coming to her rescue again, huh Jane? Sasha asked once when I'd interrupted her. Tanya leered at me from behind her, chewing gum with her mouth open. What's she ever done to you anyways? I asked. She's just minding her own business. Oh. What's she done to you, dyke? Sasha hissed. She leaned down over her cubicle and looked down at the notebook. Thanks. I looked back at her and saw that she was looking at me. I will. But, you're usually there anyways. Her voice was soft and low. I'd heard it before, but I don't remember her ever speaking directly to me. For a moment, I thought about asking her about what she was drawing. I thought about saying something else, but no. I didn't want to make her uncomfortable. I left her alone again. And number X200B. In 10th grade, I took art as an elective. I wasn't much of an artist, but I figured it would be an easy course. To the surprise of no one, Space Girl was there. I actually asked her to work with me on a few group projects. I think the prospect of being asked to work together was foreign to her. She looked at me suspiciously when I did it, but when she smiled, it was the biggest smile I'd ever seen. "You must be Jane," she said. She wasn't smiling, but she didn't sound upset either. "Yes, ma'am." The house was warm with plenty of knick-knacks on the walls. Plates and porcelain dolls mostly. Her mom sent me upstairs and I didn't waste any time. On the landing leading up to Space Girl's room, I could see a mural of family photos and paused to look at them. I could recognize Space Girl and her mother in most of them. Space Girl never seemed to be smiling. I only saw her father in a few of the very early pictures. Space Girl looked like she was only a young child in the few pictures I saw him in though. I didn't dwell for long and headed towards what I assumed was her room. The cardboard stars and planets on it gave it away. Sure enough, she was inside waiting for me. She sat facing the door behind an easel in the center of her room. Her bed was neatly made and tucked away in the corner. She had a clean little desk that she'd clearly been working on and had set a chair out for me to sit on. I hadn't expected something so overwhelmingly formal and I almost started laughing. But then I noticed her walls. "Holy shit, are these yours?" "They are," Space Girl said softly. She stood up and took the plate of cookies from me, then moved it to her desk. "No, it's all right," I said. I sat in the chair for her. "I'd like to hear about it." Space Girl watched me from the corner of her eye for a moment, as if she doubted I was being serious. But eventually she sat down behind the easel and started to draw. Soon after that, she was talking too. I stayed long after she'd gotten what she needed for her sketch, just to talk. She told me that she'd always liked fantasy, and how she liked unicorns because they were simple but pretty. I hung on to every word, and I could have sworn I saw her smiling shyly as she talked. The portrait she'd done of me was something else entirely. Her work had always been beautiful, but this made me look transcendent. I wasn't entirely sure that I was looking at myself at first. There was something about the look on my face. There was a small, almost content smile there. The warmth it conveyed was almost Disney-esque. My awe quickly turned to shame, but Space Girl didn't look upset. She just stared at me blankly like she so often did. No, not blankly. Her face might not have conveyed much emotion, but there was definitely some emotion there. I wish I'd been nicer to you, when we were younger," I said. "Is that why you're here right now?" Space Girl asked. She continued to stare. Space Girl didn't react for a moment, but then she just nodded. "Okay." Her flat tone made it hard to know what she meant by that. She stood up and walked over to the portrait. "Mom can drive you home if you need a ride," she said. I opened my mouth to say something else. I wanted to apologize, but I didn't know what. Had I offended her? Had I said something wrong? "All right. Thanks." It was the only thing I could think of. "See you tomorrow." And number X200B. My portrait was up for barely even a day before Sasha had to make a comment. I'd been on my lunch, and had just gotten some fries from the cafeteria when she and Tanya ambushed me. "Where's your flower crown, dyke?" Sasha said. I tried to walk away from her, but Sasha and Tanya just kept following me. Maybe she only fucks retarded girls. Tanya said, I'll bet Space Girl squealed like a pig when she came. I stopped dead in my tracks, and I heard Sasha stop behind me. I don't know what it was about what she'd said that pissed me off so much. But those two had finally struck a nerve. I spun around, swinging my lunch tray as hard as I could. Fries were scattered everywhere, but although I was aiming for Tanya, I hit Sasha. She went down hard, and I'm not sure if she was even still conscious when she hit the ground. Tanya was on me in an instant. She slammed me back against a wall, and kept me pinned. She had size and strength on me, and there wasn't a thing I could do to stop her. Several other students grabbed at us. A teacher finally got involved and all three of us got escorted to see the principal. As we left the cafeteria, I saw Space Girl in one of the halls, just staring at me. She didn't look up at me. Just stayed focused on her art. She didn't need to say it for me to know who she blamed. Who else would it be? I had half a mind to confront Sasha about it, but I didn't know if that would be a good idea or not. Sasha could easily just cry wolf. I wouldn't put it past her. In the end, it didn't matter. I'm sorry about the painting, I said softly. She looked at me, before sighing. I knew she'd do something like that, she said. I'm so used to it by now, that it doesn't bother me anymore. I'm sorry she wrote those things about you, though. That's not it, she said. She reached into her pocket, pulling out a crumpled up piece of paper, then slid it over to me. Space Girl looked down at the picture again, before averting her eyes. She didn't pay much attention during class. Instead of taking notes, she sketched in her notebook. I looked over a few times to see her drawing another unicorn. This one seemed so similar to the one I'd seen before. She must not have been quite happy with it though. When I looked back at her notebook, the unicorn wasn't there anymore. She must have just erased it, but it seemed so clean. Like it hadn't been erased at all. Tanya was following me on my walk home that evening. I didn't know what she had in mind, but I didn't want to put up with it. When I was in the middle of a small walking path that cut behind some of the houses on my street, I stopped and looked at Tanya as she kept approaching. "What do you want?" I asked. "It's a surprise," she said. "Sasha and I just want you to know how much we love dykes in this town." "Oops, I've said too much." "Just wanted to chat," Sasha said with a cold chuckle. "You think you can get away with pulling the shit you did the other day? No. You've been treating me like garbage for years, and for what? Because of Space Girl? You know who you're fucking choosing, right? Right? God. I hate that retard girl. But you know what? I hate you even more. Acting like you're better than me just because you feel bad for her." Sasha just laughed. On the bench behind her, I saw the portrait that Space Girl had painted of me. Sasha picked it up and tossed it in front of me, then picked up the gas can and dumped it onto the canvas. "You wanna be a dyke, I don't care. But I'm not letting you and your retarded whore put your shit up. So say goodbye to your little project, slut." Sasha dropped the unlit match and took a slow, terrified step back before toppling over. I stumbled back and looked down to see the portrait of me at her feet. But it had changed. That beautifully painted version of me was now leaning out of the canvas, invading the real world and clutching Sasha's leg tightly. "Fuck, fuck, fuck." Sasha desperately swatted at the painted me, but she couldn't overpower it. She couldn't escape. Her nails tried to dig into the pavement as she was slowly dragged into the canvas. She looked at me in horror, silently begging for help, but all I could do was stare back at her in silence. The hands of the painted me reached up, seizing Sasha by the hair and forcing her down into the canvas. It was like watching something pull her underwater. One minute she was there, the next she was gone. I stood silent in the park, staring at the painting, then at the paper unicorn. The unicorn huffed before retreating off into the woods, and then I was alone. They chalked Tanya's death up to an animal attack, and nobody ever found Sasha. I never asked Space Girl about what I saw. I don't think even she knew the answer, although she certainly knew much more than I did. High school was 10 years ago though, and I've chosen not to remember as much as I can. I've got my own life to live now, and I try not to ask so many questions. Sometimes I see paintings move, but I don't bother with a second glance, and I never ask my wife about them. She doesn't like to talk about it, and I won't ever force her. The painting of Sasha hangs in her studio at home, right beside the painting of her father. Sometimes I look at it and I wonder if maybe things could have been different, but I don't feel too guilty about it. I wouldn't feel too guilty if I heard another story about a suspicious trampling or animal attack either, but to my knowledge, there's been nothing of the sort. I guess I shouldn't be too surprised. I do my best to make sure nobody hurts my beautiful space girl.
Need a break? Too bad. These stories don't wait, and neither do we. Next one's worse. In the best way.
It's official, I'm an old man. But death seems friendlier than it used to, so listen close. The year was 1950, the setting a small town in Maine. I was a boy of 9, rather small for my age, with only one friend in the world to speak of, and his family, seemingly on a whim, decided to move 2,000 miles away. It was shaping up to be the worst summer of my life. My pop wasn't around and my mom was a chore whore. Boy, was I proud of myself when I came up with that one, so I wasn't apt to hang around the house. With some hesitation, I decided the public library was the place to be that summer. The library's collection of books, particularly children's books, was meager to say the least. But within the walls of that miserly structure, I would find no undone chores, no nagging mother, God rest her soul, and perhaps most importantly, no other children with whom I would be expected to associate. I was the only kid with a low enough social status to spend his precious days of freedom sulking amid the bookshelves, and that was just fine with me. There was nothing, only darkness. I took a couple of steps and then stopped, unnerved by the totality of the shadow which surrounded me. I waved my hands in front of me in an attempt to find a wall or a shelf or anything to hold on to. What I actually found was far more subtle, a small string, dangling from above, but far more useful. I grabbed it firmly and pulled it down. I was beginning to feel scared. This place, wherever I was, seemed to have no business in a town library. It was as though I were in a completely different building. But no 9-year-old likes to let a mystery go unsolved. Looking back, I wish I could tell my prepubescent self to turn around, go back, do anything else besides descending that staircase. You'll be spared a lot of sleepless nights, I'd say. But, of course, I didn't know that then, and I may not have listened even if I had. So instead of turning back, I took a deep breath, gripped the railing, and glared resolutely forward as I began my descent. The wood on the railing was dry and covered with splinters. I immediately let go, holding my hands out for balance as I carefully traversed the staircase. It was, or at least seemed, very long, and with only the dim glow from the string bulb far above me, my heart pounded mercilessly in the darkness. Even kids can sense when something isn't right, I think, they just don't always give a shit. By the time my feet reached the cement floor at the bottom, the light from the bulb above was very nearly a memory. But there was a new light source, and God, I'll never forget it. Directly in front of me was a door, massive, and a deep shade of red. The light was coming from behind the door, and it shone out in thin lines from all 4 sides, a sinister, dimly glowing rectangle. For the second time, I took a deep breath and went through a door I shouldn't have. In contrast to the dank room I entered from, the room behind the door was blinding. When my eyes adjusted, what I saw nearly took my breath away. It was a library. The most perfect library imaginable. I gaped in wonder as I stepped, almost reverently, further into the room. It was beautiful. It was smaller than the library above, much smaller, but it seemed to be almost tailor-made for me. The shelves were packed with brightly colored titles, both armchairs in the middle of the room were exquisitely comfortable, and the smell, my God, the smell, was simply unbelievable. Sort of a mixture of citrus and pine. I simply can't do it justice with words, so I'll suffice it to say that I've never smelled anything better. Not in my 75 years. What was this room? Why had I never heard of it before? Why was nobody else here? Those were the questions I should have been asking. But I was intoxicated. As I gazed around at all the books and basked in the smell of paradise, I could only form one thought: I will never be bored again. On my 12th birthday, I arrived later than usual. My mom had invited a couple classmates and some cousins over to our house to celebrate, a gesture which I found more tedious than touching. Really, I just wanted to spend my birthday sitting and reading and smelling paradise. Eventually, our guests went home, and I made it to the library about 15 minutes before closing time. That didn't matter, the workers never checked down there before they locked up. I was free to stay as late as I wished. This particular night, I was devouring the final chapters of an epic adventure: knights, swords, dragons, and the like. I didn't smell it until I read the final words and closed the book. The odor also seemed, for the first time, to be coming from somewhere specific. With a fair amount of trepidation, I stalked around the room, sniffing the air like a crazed canine until I came to a shelf near the back. The shelf was perfectly normal, with the exception of one title, a large, leather-bound cover of solid faded maroon, with one striking black footprint at the top of the spine. This was the source of the smell. I opened the front cover, and saw one sentence scrawled neatly in blood-red ink atop the first page. I stared at this sentence, mesmerized, as I began to retreat to my chair. I turned a page. Blank. The smell became stronger. Another page, blank, and the smell grew stronger still. I stopped for a moment, suppressed a gag, and continued walking. Then, as I neared the armchairs, I turned one final page, and there, in the same sinister print, was the last thing I expected to see: my own name. I dropped the book. I began to sprint toward the door, but as I shifted my gaze forward, my heart leapt to my throat and I stopped in my tracks. The empty chair wasn't empty anymore. An aged man in a suit sat before me, one leg crossed over the other, contemplating me with piercing gray eyes and a light smirk. This was all too much. I fell to my knees and expelled the contents of my stomach onto the carpet. I wiped my mouth, staring at my vomit, when I heard the man let out a chuckle. The man leapt to his feet, grabbed me gently by the shoulders, and helped me to my chair. He sat, once again, in his own. "I fear we got off to a bad start," he said, glancing at the pile of sick on the carpet. "The smell, it does take some getting used to." "Who are you?" I repeated. "Tonight, you will know hardship like you've never before known," he said. "I come as a friend, offering you refuge from it, and from all other storms which lie ahead. See for yourself, if you must," he said, gesturing toward the door. I threw him a contemptuous glare and bolted for the exit. As my hand closed around the knob, he said my name softly. In spite of myself, I turned around. "Your road won't be easy, friend. If it ever becomes too much for you, and I mean ever," he said, pausing to sweep his hand over the room, "you know where to find me." I slammed the door behind me and took the decrepit stairs two at a time. I exited the library, clambered onto my bike, and hightailed it home. The front door was wide open. I dismounted, leaving my bike in a heap on the ground, and approached the house cautiously. The old man was lying, he must have been. Still, tears began to sting my eyes. Heart pounding, I stepped inside and called for my mother. I heard no answer, so I turned into the kitchen. I've been haunted by that sickly sweet smell, that poisonous blend of citrus and pine, ever since that long-ago birthday. When I saw my mother in the kitchen that day, collapsed in a pool of her own blood, I smelled it. When a man claiming to be my father knocked on my college apartment door, begged me for money and beat me to within an inch of my life when I refused, I smelled it. When my wife miscarried our second child, I smelled it, and again when she miscarried our fourth. When our oldest son got behind the wheel of the family Buick completely shit-faced and got his girlfriend killed, I smelled it. A few months ago, I went back to the library and the small oak door with the ancient handle was there, right where it used to be. My evening walk has brought me past that library every day since, but I haven't gone inside. Maybe tonight I will. I'm frightened to die, yes, but lately I'm even more frightened to keep living. The old man was right, my road hasn't been easy, and I doubt it will get any easier.
And now, as the hour gets cold, and the shadows stretch long into the corners of your room, it's time.
Yeah. Chew the spooky violin. But seriously, this next one? Even I didn't sleep after hearing it.
I've claimed something coming from you.
What? Just because I sleep in a coffin and collect cursed dolls?
Among other things. This is the final descent for the night. One last story, dragged up from the depths of the disturbed and deranged.
Go ahead. Turn off the lights. We dare you.
This is HorrorSlop.
My sister Annie mothered me, with lopsided band-aids on bruised knees and lukewarm microwave meals. She told me ghost stories and didn't mind when I crawled into her bed later on, too scared to sleep alone. She taught me to dance, barefoot on the living room carpet, music channel on full volume on the TV, shaking our hips before they were fully grown. She always let me shower first so the water was hot, never complaining when she had to make do with cold. She brushed my hair every day before school, even when I screamed and hit her when she caught the tangles. Annie was dark-haired like her father, whoever he had been, but I was blonde. Annie was desperate to be blonde too, like Marilyn Monroe. Like Mom. I think she thought it would make them closer, remind Mom less of her dad. I'd give anything for her to have her hands in my hair one more time, even if it hurt. She moved to New York when I turned 18 and never came back. I still dream about her sometimes. When Mom drank too little she fell apart. She wouldn't buy food, refrigerator a gaping hole in the wall. She'd chain smoke, leaving cigarette burns on the wallpaper up by the stairs like the walls were sick and decaying. She barely slept, walking around with blue half-moons under her eyes, knuckles raw. She would scream at the slightest thing. I remember once when I spilled a glass of juice on the couch. She looked over at me with dead eyes and dragged me off onto the carpet and then took every single cushion off the couch and into the backyard and set them on fire. Annie went to watch a while from the window and then sat next to me on the floor, backs pressed against the skeleton of the seats, head resting in the crater of my collarbones. The smell of food dragged me from my room, stomach turning traitor inside my ribcage. Annie was cooking pasta, real food not made in a microwave. She'd set the table, Tammy Wynette singing softly from the CD player, Annie gently swaying her hips as she stirred the tomato sauce, rich and warm. As we ate in silence, with every bite I forgave her. Mom never cooked dinner, or remembered my favorite was spaghetti ever since I was a kid, or stayed sober long enough to sit up at a table. Annie wasn't Mom. Annie flipped the Christmas lights strung up around the porch and we sat on the plastic beach chairs watching the skies. When we were little, we'd sit outside and Annie would tell me the names of all the constellations and the stories of how they came to be hung up in the night sky. I had to grow up before I realized she made them all up as she went along. It was a game we still liked to play now, making up ridiculous stories for the shapes we could pick out. Ah, yes, that one there is the Coors Light. It got there when God dropped it out of his convertible window and never picked it up, she said, nodding sagely and hiding her smile. Of course, I said, waving my hands and pointing up past the power lines. Right next to the ashtray, left there by angels on a smoke break. She stopped laughing, voice quieter, face tilted up to all those dead stars. Let's wish, Emmy. Let's wish, so we did. Don't turn around, Emmy. Don't turn around. Instinctively I started to look over my shoulder out into the darkness. Annie grabbed my face, hard, and shook her head. I knew then she was serious. Her voice cracked, and she cleared her throat, gripping my hand tight enough to hurt, nails digging in, grounding herself. I looked down at our fingers interlocked, both of us grown from the same bones. What the fuck is going on? I asked Annie, not even bothering to brush away the tears that I couldn't stop falling. I watched my sister pick herself up off the floor, and brace her hands on the door as we heard the sound of a second door slamming open. Mom's room. The next room on the hallway was the bathroom. Annie pulled me to my feet and handed me the knife. I shook my head and pushed it back to her, terrified of what would happen if I had to use it. Annie shoved me and pressed the knife into my hands, thumb pressing hard enough on the blade to bleed. I watched my sister's blood drip down her wrist, a winding red road, still pushing into my hands despite the pain. I took the knife. Something slammed against the wall that Mom's room shared with the bathroom. A high-pitched wail followed. I held my breath, could feel my heart beat in the base of my throat, a wild and frantic thing. Something smashed in the room next door. Annie brushed the hair off my face, gently tucking it behind my ear. Promise, she mouthed and unlocked the door as slowly as possible, bolt scraping gently. I watched the curve of her shoulder disappear into the black hall outside, like the moon in eclipse. And then she was gone. I couldn't move or breathe for a second, and then I slammed the bolt shut just as something bounced off the outside of the door. A high-pitched scream followed, handle rattling up and down hard enough to pop one of the screws. I watched it roll towards me on the tiles. And then silence. I sat with my back to the door, holding the knife and wishing I was holding Annie's hand instead. Still silence. Nothing but me and my lungs slowly filling the room with my breath. Came a voice through the door. I started, hands gripping the knife. Honey, what's going on? Mom, my voice cracked. Mama, is that you? I wrapped my arms around myself, shaking, trying to keep myself still. Sweetie, it's okay, just open the door. It's okay, just let me in. The handle rattled again, gentler. Just let me in, it's all okay. She banged on the door and I took my handle of the bolt. Honey, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I missed your birthday. I'm sorry I'm such a terrible mother. Please, her voice broke and she started to cry, just let me in, baby, I'm so sorry. My sister's voice came through the door, warm and gentle. Yeah, Emily, let us in, it's all okay. My hand froze on the bolt and I tightened my grip on the knife. Annie never called me by my full name. A hand banged on the door, handle rattling. Emily, let us in. Annie's voice became low and guttural, followed by the same shrill giggles from before. Mom spoke now, pleading and crying, voice getting louder and louder. Let us in, let us in, let us in, over and over again, punctuated by her fists on the door. I thought about demons and monsters, all the bedtime stories we pray don't crawl out from under the bed. Turns out there was no demon. No wild animal or bad men trying to break in. Just Mom, out of her mind on booze and drugs and everything in between, coming to the end of a week-long binge. Something had finally broken inside her head, and this time we couldn't put her back together no matter how hard we tried. Sometimes you fall one last time and you never get back up. Turns out the real monsters are the ones that eat you alive slowly, the kind that come in a bottle or a needle or at the end of a long list of reasons why you can't get out of bed in the morning. Sometimes the monsters are the ones that raise you or love you the most. But it's up to you if you let them in.
And there you have it, dear listeners. One final scream, echoing into the void.
Yeah. Void screams, eternal darkness, I did it. Can I eat now?
We're still on air, Roxy.
Oh no, just the spooky FCC is gonna haunt us for breaking the mood.
If you enjoyed tonight's descent into depravity, don't forget to like, subscribe, and what does he always say?
Stab that bell icon like it's your ex possessed by a demon, and leave a comment telling us what story made you question. I have choices.
And if you survive the night, we'll be waiting.
Same that time, same that crypt.
You're the reason we have complaints, you know that.
You're welcome.